Welcome, Legionnaires, to the Long Live the Legion podcast, where we talk about the Legion of Superheroes comic book team and break subjects down so that whether you're just out of the Legion Academy or you're a longtime veteran with your own flight ring, you get to know the team a little bit better. I'm your co-host, Jim.
And I'm your co-host, Jay.
And welcome to episode 34. What's on our mission monitor board today, Jay?
Well, today we decided we had so much fun last week. We brought in a couple of people. We spent a lot of time, or sorry, not last week, last episode. Time is just crazy for me. We had so much fun talking about Invisible Kid that we wanted to just keep the fun going because we find Invisible Kid's just such a fascinating character in Legion history. So we're going to focus solely on his death, which I know sounds a little bit somber and might get a little bit dark. We'll try to keep it light. And we did the same thing. We invited two longtime Legion podcasters to join us. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Eric, if you can start.
Hi, thank you, Jim and Jay. I appreciate the invite. I'm Eric. I do the Long Box Review podcast, where I talk about comics and other things that I enjoy in life. And I do as you were alluding to, I do a Legion Project podcast with my co-host, Peter.
And I am Peter Rios. From the Comic Geek Speak podcast, from the Daily Rios podcast. And it was very strange to hear Jay say longtime Legion podcasters. I guess we have fallen into that category, Eric.
Yeah. What is it? 6 years? 7 years?
Going on 7 or maybe even 8.
Yeah.
And as Eric mentioned, we do the long box. You do the long box. I'm drunk. We do the Legion Project podcast, which is a focus on the Volume 3 Baxter Run series. And happy to be here on another Legion podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today. This is awesome. And one of the things, so first of all, if you're a Legion fan and you have not subscribed to the Legion Project podcast, what are you waiting for? Do it and listen to these guys break down those issues. It's just a great listen. And so what I thought we would do is take this Superboy and the Legion number 203, which features the death of Invisible Kid, and kind of break it down in the Legion Project style, and then talk about the issue and talk about kind of the weird things that happened during this issue. So, because it's kind of it's a fun ride, but it's a really weird one.
Do we have 5 hours? Because that's usually we go for a long time.
I was going to say, and there's double of us, so we got to double the time, right?
Exactly. That's all good. It's all good. All right. So without any further ado, I can go ahead and start the synopsis of this very, very strange issue, if we're good with that. So this is Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, number 203, cover date, August 1974. Massacre by remote control. Okay, so we start the issue. 4 intruders, 1 female, 3 male, each with a Roman numeral on their chest, all in black, break into Legion HQ. Number 1 goes down the ventilation shaft, but is quickly caught by Sunboy. Number 2 transmutes the wall. Numbers 3 and 4, 3 being the female, open up a hole in the ground to invade from underground, but are caught by Mon-El. Number 2 gets to the Legion Museum and activates his infrared device. It was a test, and number 2 is revealed to be Element Lab, who wins the challenge. After that, all is revealed. Number 1 is Karate Kid. Number 3 is Phantom Girl. Number 4 is Lightning Lad. Invisible Kid, who was supposed to be guarding the museum, is in some kind of shock and pops back into the visible spectrum, collapsing on the ground. Meanwhile, in the background, we see a box in the museum that says, "Components from the robot Tharok's electronic brain." Brainy and Mon-El scan Lyle's brain in the med lab, where we learn he can go into an alternate dimension when he's invisible. They find out Lyle met a girl named Mila in this dimension, but the screen blasts apart during the scan due to an energy surge. Lyle wakes up and storms out, saying, "I don't want to talk about it." Brainy theorizes that whatever Mila said was so startling it sent him into shock. Hysterical amnesia was so powerful it shorted out the Mento screen. The next day, back in the museum, Phantom Girl is asking Lyle about this other dimension. He explains it's a matter of focus on one world or the other when he's invisible, similar to focusing on items near you or far away. Lyle tells Tinya she's the only Legionnaire that he can confide in. Maybe because they're so much alike in power set? He also tells Tinya that he's the only Legionnaire never to have a steady girlfriend. The Tharok brain starts to buzz when Lyle says he has it all worked out for he and Mila to be together. Meanwhile, he's on a week's probation of using his powers after skipping out to see Mila. His plan is to bring her into this dimension to marry her. Elsewhere, Dream Girl dreams of Validus attacking the Legion, but the rest are confused because Validus needs to be controlled. But Saturn Girl detects Tharok's thought waves. Superboy goes to check on Tharok in Prison Complex X-33, but Tharok's in surgery, so can't control Validus. End of part 1. In part 2, we open with Validus diving towards Earth, with Superboy on an intercept course. Validus surges Superboy into unconsciousness and throws him into the Legion HQ from orbit. Karate Kid tries to subdue Validus, but is unsuccessful. Sunboy blinds him, but in blind swatting, Validus knocks out both Sunboy and Karate Kid. Meanwhile, Phantom Girl searches for Invisible Kid in the museum. Mon-El tries to sneak attack Validus, but Validus somehow expects the attack and subdues Mon-El. Invisible Kid has figured out that the Tharok brain parts have reassembled themselves and are controlling Validus. He moves to dismantle it, but Validus arrives. Invisible Kid grabs the brain, Validus grabs Invisible Kid, and both the brain and Invisible Kid are crushed to death. With the brain destroyed, Validus flies away. Mon-El, Superboy, and Phantom Girl find Lyle's body. He's gone, choke, just when he was on the verge of a romance of his life. Somehow, Mila appears to the Legionnaires and gives the rest of the story. She's really a ghost, and that's what stunned Lyle earlier. When I told Lyle what I really was, he couldn't accept it, but she'll take care of him now that they're both dead. The end. Well, that was a weird thing to read. All right, so quick reactions from the folks on the horn here. Peter, you're right next to me on the view screen here. What do you think? What was your reaction to all?
So this was the first time I read this issue.
Really?
Yes, as we talk about on our Legion podcast, there's a certain point where I started Legion, and I've certainly collected all the way back past that point or previous to that point, and I've read a few of those issues, but I'm not as, even though I know the big beats, I knew Invisible Kid was killed. In fact, when I was reading Legion, we were just a handful of issues away from the secondary story to all of this, right? So I always knew him as a deceased character, just like Pharaoh Lad and the others. So this is the first time I read it. It has an interesting mixture of, you can see where there's still some Silver Age zany story elements that, little things coming in and out that on one hand kind of embellish the story because there's a certain part that I didn't notice until the reveal, and then you go back and realize it is there in the story and the art, right? Okay, so that's cool. But just random Legion pop-ins here and there, and just random story things and secrets that nobody talks to each other, right? Like they save it for the end, et cetera, et cetera. But it's against this, quote unquote, new artist, right? Mike Grell. So looking at early Mike Grell on the Legion was fun to see the hints and the potential of what he will become later, even outside of the Legion. So it was an enjoyable read because it's one of those stories, like in your in the way our discussion is going to go. It's an important story, quote unquote, but it's an important Legion story. I'm glad I read it on that aspect. It features a few characters I really like, and the artwork really sells it. It's an issue I actually have in my collection, so I got to read a comic from my collection, which we always celebrate.
Nice.
One more down, thousands more to go. Even with the little weirdness of things, it feels like a slightly above average enjoyable Legion story. Is like, that's better than ones that just completely make your head go, what? It's not like one of the all-time greats, definitely,
No, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that, Peter, because this was also one of the few issues that we've kind of gone over as part of this podcast where I actually had the physical copy of the actual floppy. I had to kind of dig for it because, it's been in my collection. I think I picked this up in Baltimore a few years ago. I think I paid like $20 for it. I probably overpaid for it, but it is what it is. But yeah, it was sitting in my closet in the long boxes, and so I had to kind of dig for it. So it was fun. I mean, I had a lot of really, it brought back a lot of memories seeing all the ads in the comic book on the pages and stuff like that, because I'm so used to seeing things digitally now. It was just nice and nostalgic in a lot of ways. Okay, Eric, what about you? What do you think of it?
It's interesting. Sometimes Peter and I see things eye to eye. And then other times I'm like, what is he talking about? I would not consider this an above average story because of the inconsistencies, the weird lies of it. And I really, really disliked a certain aspect that is touched on barely at the end of the story about his death. But other than that, I agree. I mean, this is Mike Grell. I believe this is Mike Grell's first full issue that he did, because they mentioned in the very truncated so-called letters page It was more like an editor's note in the issue that he had done the previous issue or had finished the previous issue over Cockrum's pencils or whatever, which I haven't looked at actually. I want to go back and look at that. And so seeing Mike Grell, which he wasn't my first Legion artist that I encountered. But as I continued to realize I love the Legion so much so that when I had access to a comic book shop near my home, I started buying these back issues. And I think it was like 212, 213 was one of the first back issues that I got where I saw Mike Grell's art. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. And so seeing this as his first one, I totally can see, this is only 10 issues, 9 or 10 issues before those two where I encountered him. But he's already there. He's exhibiting the Grellness of his art in this first issue that he did. And it's just like amazing. And I love there's one thing I'm going to talk about later that I just absolutely love that he did artistically. And that was just so much fun. That was the most fun I had with this issue. And we could talk about the things that don't work with the story. Because that's the one thing I tend to do is rate the issues that we're reading based on the narrative. How well does a story work? And this one, I think, is a bit below average, Peter. Sorry.
No, that's all good. Again, I said slightly above average, but again, it's nowhere near the best issue.
No.
Yeah. No. But it's for pulling out a back issue in my collection and being able to talk about it like that. I do find things in here that's like, that makes for a good episode, or it makes for a good issue, because there have been issues where it's like, I don't know what to say about this.
Yeah.
Again, reference Lord Romder's Castle. For those that know.
And again, I'm like one of the few people that kind of enjoy that. I'm just going to go on record.
Yeah, you rip me apart for defending Reflecto, and then you defend that. So that's I
was going to say, I listened to your Reflecto episode, and I was like, Jim, I don't know.
What's
one
wrong
of my
with
favorites.
Well, would it have been worse if he had said, I really enjoyed the Dr. Mayavale issue? Like that would have been,
We almost saw a spit take from Eric there. That was pretty awesome.
That's probably a better one, Jay, because that is, even with the Perez cover art, that is really stretching a Legion story for sure.
So I just have to say this. One little call out to one of our sister podcasts, to the Men of Steel podcast. They interviewed J.M. DeMatteis, and all I wanted Case to ask him was, all right, Dr. Merivale, let's talk about this for 10 minutes and just deep dive that. Luckily, he did not, because I'm pretty sure J.M. would have been like, I'm not talking about this.
He probably would have said, I don't remember anything about that.
Exactly. So I actually think, Peter and Eric, I think the fact that you disagree on this issue might be the best indicator of what this issue actually is. I think there's highs and there's lows. And I would say, like, for my take on this, I think it's an above average Carrie Bates story, especially for the era, but I don't think it's an above average Legion story. Like I've gone on record in a few different cases. I'm not a gigantic fan of what Carrie Bates brought to the Legion. I think the art elevated almost everything he was doing. So you kind of ignored the fact that he never wanted to use more than 4 Legionnaires, and that his stories tended to make no sense when you actually thought about them. Or he seemed more interested in writing Superboy than anybody else. And at certain points you're like, okay, I mean, the one I always go to is like the Bouncing Boy Duo Damsel marriage, where Bouncing Boy does nothing when his future wife is about to be killed, but Superboy does everything. And you're like, really? You can't give Chuck like just 5 panels, like that's it. And I think that, and so I think in that case, like, I think it's an interesting story in that there's enough surprises, like the 4 people who break in. And yes, if you think about it for even 30 seconds, you're like, okay, these are obviously Legionnaires because they get the powers. But it's a nice little way to start the episode or start the issue that's different from what we're used to seeing. But at the end of the day, all the good things that I like about it are knocked over by the fact that, and we're going to talk about this a lot later on the episode, the death makes no sense. Like, it's just a really, really strange choice, top to bottom. And the fact that they try to make it like that all the Legionnaires are like, this is great. Like, he gets to be with his girlfriend now. And you're, what? Like, the only character I would actually have bought that from would have been Element Lad. But that wasn't part of his character in 1974. But later on, he would get that of like, oh, he's dead. Like, it's cool that he's going to go do something else. But in 74, like, the fact that I think it's both Mon-El and Superboy are like, awesome, he gets to be with his girlfriend. And That just ruins the whole thing for me.
It was very interesting what you said about Carrie Bates wanting to write a Superboy story more than Legion, whether that was this issue or just the title in general. Maybe this is where my inexperience will play in, because we aren't far removed from when the title was just Superboy, right? Even though it may have featured the Legion, and now we're in the Superboy starring the Legion of Superheroes. So for you readers who either went back and read it all or lived it at the time, was this a Legion book or was it still a Superboy and Legion book? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like I know when the title shifts to Legion, but I wondered about when you said that, I was like, oh, what is the identity of this book right now? Even though we had that big wedding in 200, like, is
Yeah.
it still just Superboy and the Legion, or is it Superboy and the Legion? You know, like, what's the identity?
So that's a fascinating question, because you're kind of asking the question of what is DC's identity at this point in time? Like 1974, and please, anybody who thinks I'm wrong on this, and this, like, please correct me, but the sense that I've always gotten, DC in the 70s is literally a company that is floundering beyond belief because they don't know who they are. And they still think that it's the 1960s or the 1950s, which is, if you put Superman on a cover, it's going to sell. It's going to sell everywhere. And that'll kind of save us from everything. And it's really a company that, and this is going to sound harsher than I mean it to sound, but I actually don't think I'm wrong here, that doesn't care about the comic fan. It cares about the 7-year-old kid who's in a drugstore, who sees the cover and says, Mom, I want that. And so at the time in the early 70s, Marvel is definitely like, we know who our fan base are. You know, we're going to sell to this. And DC is like, our fans, our readers are these kids who convince mom to buy the comic. But the Legion is a very, very different animal, because the Legion is basically the only DC book that exists because of fans demanding it. When we talk about the Legion Outpost, which was this big fan newsletter that came out, like, they're the ones that were pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for DC to finally tell this story. So I think the people running DC think it's a Superboy book. And I think the fans who are buying it think it's a Legion book. And I think Carrie Bates wants to write Superman and Superboy, and that's why he's on this book. And so there's a constant sort of struggle with these stories where you've got, and especially when Jim Shooter returns, you've got Carrie Bates who's like, I'm going to go back to Smallville in the 60s as much as I possibly can, because that's what I want to write and that's what I think people want. And then you've got Jim Shooter going, nope, we want to be in the 30th century and we want Legion writers. So it's really a title that's battling for its own identity at this point. And what's really funny is, in the 70s, this is one of DC's best-selling books. Like, it's Superman and it's Legion, and they're like, Batman isn't selling as well, Justice League isn't selling as well. Like, this is kind of one of DC's golden books. And I don't think DC knows why people are reading it. And that's why you get all these weird choices. And that's why you get all these weird decisions in the 70s. You know, I mean, very simply, like letting Cockrum walk over pages and then letting Grell walk. And I don't know if you know the story, like, they were ready to cancel Warlord after, I think, the 3rd issue, because they had no clue how many people were reading it. And like, you've got Mike Grell in house. You've got, okay, this is the guy that we can be building our company around. And they're quick to go, nope, bye-bye. And so that's why I say it's this really, really weird moment. And I think it's a great question, because I think for a Legion fan, like, I read this and this is Legion first and Superboy second. Like, I think that's what the focus of the book should be. But I don't think Carrie Bates is doing that. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I apologize for that. But that's our podcast.
So I agree with that. I think I agree totally with the idea of, have DC having an identity crisis, if you'll pardon the pun. But I, based on my reading, where I did read some early to mid 200 issues, not all of them, but some of them, I could see the focus being on Superboy, the corporate push versus what they feel like the fans might want. So I still see this as a Superboy comic at this point, where he's got some friends doing stuff with him in the future, and it doesn't work. It doesn't quite work. And I think that's just because, like, in this issue, Carrie Bates, like you said, would rather probably write Superman and Superboy. And you have to remember too, give props to, I guess, the fact that Superboy was such a popular character that he lasted around 200 issues on his own magazine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even though the Legion comes in and then takes over, which is, proves the longevity or the popularity of the Legion with fans, with comic book readers at the time. I mean, that's a huge milestone that they decided to take Superman, make him younger to appeal, I guess, to a younger audience at the time. And he just continues to be a very popular character in both incarnations.
Yeah, it is definitely especially like bronze, or not bronze, like silver golden age. Like you put the Superman crest on something and it's going to sell. So they're just trying to get as many things as they can on it. But like I say, I think by this point in time, fans are starting to sort of say like, no, that's not what we want. But I don't think DC is accepting what they're hearing. And as well, when you compare it to the Marvel comics at the time, right? Like Marvel is pushing every boundary, but ironically enough, it's not outselling. Like especially in 1974, DC is still a better selling comic company, and they were throughout the 60s. It's just that you can see the numbers dramatically shifting as this decade goes on, and you can see it's DC not understanding what is it that the audience wants. And that's why I think this is one of the only books that actually sells well in the 70s for DC, because this is actually giving the fans what they want. They want, and you can make an argument having Mike Grell draw the literal sexiest characters in comic books in the 70s is not hurting when your audience is a bunch of preteen boys. But as well, I mean, that's why Dreamgirl's in this episode or in this issue. It's also we want to see this big team. We want to see the sci-fi. We want to see we want to see the space stories. And yeah, and Superboy is always kind of a weird fit in the 70s because here's this Gawshucks from Smallville. And I would argue in this issue, it actually works better as soon as he gets knocked out. When he gets knocked out and then they have to all solve it, I'm like, awesome. Now the Legion gets to do something. And it's kind of cool. Anyway, I know I went way too long. Jim, what did you think of all this?
I echo a lot of the things that you all said. The note that I made here was that it starts strong and then it kind of devolves over time, right? Because you have this scene at the very beginning that's very mysterious. What's going on? And then it just kind of takes these weird turns going into something's going on with Lyle. And then, wait a minute, Lyle has a girlfriend that's a ghost. And then Validus kind of comes out of nowhere. It just makes all these really bizarre turns. And at the end of the day, I just feel like it was a thin story that was just made to kill off Invisible Kid. Basically, that's kind of what I came out with this. It very much felt like the Tasha Yar death in Star Trek: The Next Generation. It was very empty. Right, where the episodes purely exist just to get rid of Denise Crosby and the character off the show. That's how this issue felt to me when I was reading it, if that makes any sense.
Well, that makes complete sense, because I think you're right. At the end of the day, this issue exists to kill Lyle Norg. And so a lot of the hoops that he has to jump through while he's writing the story is I think they're trying to make it so that they make the fans happy, even though they're killing this character that's been around for 15 years. And is a fan favorite. And at the same time, it is an empty death. It's a completely empty, I mean, I would go so far as to just the stupidest way you can die. So the whole premise is Therak's brain has come back to life, right? And is calling Validus.
Somehow.
So here's the crazy thought. Hey, Mon-El, take the brain, fly it up into space and throw it into the sun. Story's over. Nobody dies. It's all good. And at the end of the day, they never said why they didn't want Validus to get to the brain. What was he stopping? That's what kind of drove it. Did anybody get that from the story? Can you tell me why it was so important that they didn't want Validus to do this?
Well, I think it has to do with the premonition that Dreamgirl has, right? So they take it as a threat, but I'm trying to find the page here.
So I've got it. It's basically, she says I had a dream that Validus is attacking the Legion. That's it. That was her whole dream.
Yeah. Mono says, "Are you sure you saw Validus attacking us in your dream?" So they take it as, and I know this doesn't quite work, right? As you're alluding to, they're attacking. He's attacking us. Therefore, we must defend ourselves, because they don't realize yet Therak's brain parts. Right, even though it's not, kindly, artistically, readers see it, or it's like watching a horror movie and people yelling at the screen, "Don't go in there."
It's a Chekhov gun moment for sure, right?
Exactly.
You're exactly what it is.
Yeah, and of course, like every other issue of this time, Superboy always figures this out first. So there's always that moment where Superboy goes, I've figured out what's wrong. And then, of course, in this one, he gets zapped. And although he doesn't really get zapped, it almost was like kinetic energy built up in Validus and he got blasted. But then Invisible Kid figured it out, and that's why he's there. But again, like, okay, I know you want this robot brain. Why am I willing to die to prevent him from getting this? It just doesn't make any sense, unless I'm reading this wrong.
Well, I mean, they are teenagers of the future, and therefore they see things, I think, pretty black and white. And so, like, he's coming to attack us, therefore we must do something about it, instead of taking a step back and going, oh, what's really going on here? And maybe there's a more or a less deadly way to deal with the situation.
Jay, you mentioned something about the Superboy takeout, right? I was really struck by that particular page because we've been told that the Silver Bronze Age pre-crisis Superboy is really, really powerful. And then for Validus to come along and just kind of zap him somehow, it's not really even clear how. I guess it's his mental lightning and whatever. But yeah, that zaps him and knocks him out? Really? Okay, so sure.
That has been my pet peeve about the Fatal Five members for years, in that, five of them can sometimes battle the Legion to a standstill, yet Validus can sometimes show up and just, lay them all out. And it never made sense to me, other than, Validus being under the control of Theroch and doing, bad things. Validus, as an antagonist in the story, does not need anybody else. Especially if you go by this story, we only see several Legionnaires, right? But the entirety of the Legion, theoretically, could not stop him. And it just always bugged me that was the case. Yes, Validus should be powerful, but on the other hand, taking out Superboy and all the Mon-El, all the other, oh, come on.
I'm a big Validus stan. I love Validus, not just because he's purple. I just love Validus. And some of it has to do with, again, when I started reading Legion, not even half a year later, they did the whole retconning thing with Validus, which obviously we can't bring into the story because that wasn't even in anybody's mind yet, right? Like, we could play that game of, but with the retcon, he is all powerful because blah, blah, blah. But anyway, there's been a lot of times where, okay, so in your podcast and in ours, we bring up the X-Men a lot as sort of like, these two teams are very comparable in a lot of ways. And for the X-Men, I always feel that when a Sentinel shows up, every X-Men, man, woman, whatever, should poop their pants. When Validus shows up, I feel like the Legionnaires should be like, okay, whoa.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And part of it is because he is so chaotic and so uncontrollable. That's probably why you need the other Fatal Five members to maybe steer him, Again, I haven't read all those issues. I don't even know what they do with him, But and sometimes you see him and he's just slightly taller than everybody. Other times he's as big as a skyscraper. So I like that he's this wild, in this, and especially in this issue, he's a MacGuffin, right? Carrie Bates is like, if there was a soundtrack, it would be a slow drum just constantly in the background, getting bigger and bigger, because that's what I think Carrie Bates wants to do, right? He wants to get the readers to be like, oh my God, something is coming.
Yeah.
Something is coming. Oh my God, where is it? Now it's in the space. Oh, now it's on our roof, so I like that they, what's the one character you can do that with in the Legion? That's probably Validus, maybe, because he's not going to talk. He's not going to pontificate like Universo or somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So I do like that. And a lot of this is my own headcanon, that Validus shows up, we got trouble. There was part of me that also wondered if this issue I was trying to look at other titles that came out at this time for DC. And you had a lot of horror stuff, right? Ghosts and House of Secrets and,
yep,
of course, Swamp Thing, Tales of Unexpected, Weird World, The Witching Hour. And I was like, are they trying to do something like that, right? Like where it's just a shocking story, but there's a secret that makes it you don't want to scare the kiddies too much, right? Like, it's okay. Right. He's dead, but
he's really okay.
Yeah. And I have a bigger theory about what's going on, but I want to save it because I don't want it to inform the conversation.
Sure, absolutely. All good. But I really appreciate what you said there, Peter, because it kind of gave me a better appreciation of page 18, where the Legion kind of attacks Validus. My first initial reading was that it's kind of a Keystone Cops moment, because you have, Karate Kid attacks, then Sun Boy attacks, then they kind of get smashed together. But, when you consider Validus essentially kind of being his own force of nature, it makes that moment when he's blinded makes a ton of sense when he's just flailing around. Of course, yeah, that makes total sense when he's that kind of a creature, and he can take down anybody who's in his path because nobody can see it coming. It's total chaos. I love it.
Yeah, you guys both make good points about Validus. And so I'm rethinking my concern about Validus that I just expressed, because that's a great way to describe him. He's a force of nature. He's a hurricane that's arrived, and it's wonderful. But then you get that next scene with Mon-El, and he's more than just that, right? Because he's able to direct his lightning through his crotch underneath his. I'm like, what a weird design that Grail throws in there to zap Mon-El out of commission. So,
Now, did you assume that was the Tharok brain telling Validus to do that? That's kind of what I took from there.
Possibly, but that's the thing. You really have to infer a lot in this story.
Yes.
Yeah, you could infer that or the other, but it's just never put on the page, and that's my problem with the story generally. Bates could have easily put in here that the brain, the new brain, is somehow communicating, even though Tharok himself is unconscious, right? Yes. It's another personality or some such. I don't know if that would have ruined the so-called reveal or not, but there are things that he could have done structurally to make this work a little better.
Yeah. I mean, they make it clear that it is Tharok, because Saturn Girl comes in and says, "I'm sensing his thought waves." So it's not really a cliffhanger, but kind of that moment where, well, it can't be Tharok because he's in surgery. So to your point, Eric, I mean, it's like, yeah, you have to infer the fact that it's this somehow reassembled electronic brain that's doing all of this stuff. So yeah, that was a good point of, you have to fill in the gap with your own headcanon for a lot of this story.
Yeah, and there's a certain points where if they had done something slightly different, it would have made more sense. So like Superboy flies to that prison planet and they go, Tharok's gone. Somebody grabbed him. And then, okay, now we understand why Validus is going to get this other part. Like now it makes sense. But because he's there, you're like, okay, so why is he doing this? Like, it's just he's being called. And it kind of just falls apart. And I think that's true. Like, that's the problem with this story. It's like you said, your own headcanon, you have to fill in the blanks. You have to say like, okay, this is this. And I think it's interesting when you're saying like the whole story should feel like just the threat is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, in which case you cut part one, right? Like you just get rid of the break-in and all of that stuff, because that doesn't contribute to this story at all. And I think the realization here is like, this is a 21-page story and he wastes 5 or 6 of the pages. And so we're trying to get this massive thing that's happening, and he just has no space to tell it. And I think that's kind of where it comes down to. Like, I really honestly get the sense that, and again, this is going to be a bigger discussion later. So they've decided we're going to kill Invisible Kid. Okay, so part one, how do we get there? Okay, we got to do this and this and this. And then Bates is going, I've always wanted to tell a story about 4 Legionnaires breaking in and they're all in costume. So I'm going to throw that, even though it doesn't tie into this at all. But it's like, I've always wanted to do this, and I got 21 pages, so I've got it. And I think it's kind of funny. Like, this is almost like, we always complain about decompressed storytelling. This is almost the big failure of compressed storytelling, because he doesn't have enough space for any of this.
Don't you need the first part, though, to get to why Invisible Kid wasn't there to stop Element Lad? Like, you need something to pull him out of whatever, so that they can yell at him and then put him in detention, so that then it connects to, he kind of thinks we as readers think he's going to do it again later. It's still a weird thing to throw in, because, I like what you're saying. It's like they have to reverse engineer this story, whether it was because they had a really cool Nick Cardy cover or what, and they're like, we're going to kill Invisible Kid. Okay, we have to give him a crisis of faith. Like, we have to give him something that gets him off his game. Okay, he's in love with a ghost girl. Okay, great. But why is that an issue? Oh, because he found out a big secret from her. Okay, but why? Where? Oh, during this thing where he was supposed to protect so I can see that like backward trend being very kind of weird.
That's the thing. That intro story, that intro part, the break-in, doesn't exist to set up the Validus story. It only exists to explain that he's hanging out with this ghost girl. And so if you had said, let's just start like page 1, Dream Girl wakes up, Validus is coming. And they call everybody in the Legion together and they go, we got to talk about this. And Invisible Kid doesn't show up. You've just done the exact same thing, but in 2 pages instead of, right?
Yeah.
So like, again, like my worst habit is I like to rewrite all these stories, like as somebody in 2026. And I fully admit it's a problem, but it is one of those where you just say, like, if the goal was this, there are more direct ways to get there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's definitely 2 completely different story tracks. This is kind of why I like this book. I like the idea of this initial setup where you have these mysterious figures breaking in. And, it's just visually told really interestingly, I think. Although if you're very tuned into how the Legion works, you knew immediately that number 2 was Element Lad, right? It's because he's transmuting the wall. But there's a lot of cool visual stuff going on here with Lonell and then Tinya and Lightning Lad. Although it was weird, why didn't Tinya just kind of phase through the floor to get down to the basement? Why did she have to go through this hole that Lightning Lad makes for some reason? I don't know. That was a little bit weird, but the concept of the story of that beginning intro section was kind of cool for me.
But the problem is that Bates does it like 3 different times, like people breaking into Legion headquarters to steal something. It's a trope he just goes back to again and again and again. So as you're reading his run, you're like, okay, cool, we've seen this, and we've seen it. But to your point on Phantom Girl, does she ever use her powers in this issue? No. Like, she just stands there and cries, and then she listens to Invisible Kid tell his.
Which is, well, we'll get there eventually, but I do want to, there's something about Phantom Girl here that I do want to bring into the conversation once we get to a certain point in the story, for sure.
Yeah, it's I'm tempted to say we should just get to that, rather than wait. Like, if there's a good point, we keep saying we'll get to that later.
I think one other thing we should probably talk about or just mention before going there, since they're kind of related in some ways, is that this whole sequence where, and this is something that Kirby pointed out last episode, in that whole sequence, in this setup in the Legion Museum section, you have this tall statue of Pharaoh Lad standing there the whole time as this kind of, if you're into the Legion, you know that this is some kind of a foreshadowing, right?
Chekhov gun, as somebody
Exactly.
mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the things I really liked about this story, is that at least I don't know if Bates put it in his script or if Gorell added it. I mean, that's not really the place for Pharaoh Lad statue as far as I recall, but it works in terms of the foreshadowing, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, like I said, I really like that they're really foreshadowing this, including Tharok's brain parts. So, you get that throughout several pages.
Yep, absolutely.
Including, I think, the splash page. Because I feel when I read the splash page, do you guys know or remember or did you ever read the Doom Force special from 1992 by Grant Morrison? And it has a Keith Giffen and Mike Mignola cover. And they're spoofing, Liefeld's characters. And there's a caption that says, which one of these heroes will die? And it's pointing right towards a character that will die. That's what I got from the splash page, because they all have word balloons. They all have dialogue. It's true, Legionnaires. This evil force commanding that Hulk, it's attacking us right here under our noses all along. But this box, this box is our real folk. I've never seen anything like it. And what's Invisible Kid doing? Nothing but turning and about ready to get squashed. So right there, I was like, that's fun. That's cool. That's old school. Your splash page is going to tell you everything you need to know about the story. So between that and the whole Pharaoh Lad thing, I think that's one of the reasons why I give it a little bit of props, and the Tharok building of the brain, because on my first read, I did not pay it. I saw it. You could see what's happening, right?
Yeah.
But until they said it, and me, Eric knows I love to really look at things. And I was like, oh yeah, it's joining together.
Right.
Okay. I took it for granted that it was already formed and all this. So I like that. That's a plus on Carrie Bates' side of storytelling.
I should say, I know I'm going to rip into Carrie Bates, and I already have, but the guy could write comics and could put together stories. I just wasn't a gigantic fan of a lot of stuff he did here. I'm not going to say he's a bad writer. We'll just go with that. I was going to ask this. I could be completely misremembering this, but I had thought that the issue before they had actually made reference to a Legionnaire's going to die next issue. And I mean, I could be completely off on that. Like, do not take this as the truth. But I had thought that it was one where like they knew this was coming. Like that the fans even were like, okay, something's happening. And now we all have to dig into our long boxes and see if I'm right. And everybody who's listening to this is yelling at either their phone or their car or whatever, going like, no, they never did this. You're wrong again. I think it was one of those where again, because it was 74, I don't think they were trying to hide it. Like, I think it was just, hey, somebody's going to die. Let's go. I mean, also calling it massacre doesn't help, but that's.
Yeah, as we were talking about that splash page, which Peter, I also had that in my notes too. It's like, they're really showing where they're going with this. But yeah, the massacre, one person died. That's an interesting choice, but it's all about the flamboyant storytelling. It's all about, hey, look at this splashy thing, get your attention and go.
So I'm looking at the 202 synopsis, actually, Jay. I'm not going to dig in my box there. It looks like the only new story in that one is the Lost a Million Miles from Home story that's featuring Colossal Boy and Trini Violet flying home in space. Everything else is a reprint, it looks like. So
it's one of those.
No. And again, I could be. I misremember things all the time, so wouldn't be shocked if that's happening again.
Couldn't it be in the letters page or something? The next issue
could be
blurb.
Could be.
Yeah, because I remember DC doing that a lot. It's like next issue, blah blah blah, and you're like, what the heck? What?
Yeah.
And
well,
because it's not being shown in the story itself. It's just like, hey, next issue we're gonna drop a really big surprise on you.
Yeah, and so next question I have for this, isn't Invisible Kid destroying Tharok's brain murder? And isn't that against the Legion Constitution?
Well, I don't know. I figured that the electronic brain kind of put itself together, so it'll probably put itself back together sometime in the future.
There you go. Things I always wonder. So it's like,
that's a great question because, yeah, but we are shown though that Tharok, while he's comatose because he's undergoing surgery, he's still alive without those parts. So the fact that the parts are able to somehow assemble themselves and be a brain, even though Tharok is known for he's a cyborg, and it's the fleshy brain and the computer brain or parts that form Tharok, and yet. Yeah, so it's all weird, wibbly wobbly, not timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah, just weird stuff. I mean, that's one of the things that because I remember the gross details about this particular issue, but when I didn't remember a lot of the finer details. So when I was reading this, I half expected there to be some plot element of Tharok in the hospital having some kind of a weird mental link to those parts, and that's what was making them kind of come together. But no, that never happened. It's that's just how it is. It's fine, whatever.
But to go back to your point about the murder thing, is that murder? Does crushing the brain parts kill Tharok? No, because he's alive without them. Now, whether or not he's lobotomized or something, that's another question. But that's not part of the Constitution. It's only if you kill people.
That's right,
and only in certain situations, right? So, like if it's. Like if you drop a tree branch on them, that's murder and you're out of the Legion for a while. But if you literally break the person's neck, cool, that's self-defense. You're all good. You're back on the team.
Well, it's the 30th century. They can heal that kind of stuff now.
So it's the Legion. We just, it's like we can't have more than one power unless you're a Rand's twin, and then we don't care. Do we want to go to like stuff we really liked? I know we've been kind of slogging on this issue a little bit, or did we want to get to like the big questions that we have?
I was thinking we should kind of start turning the discussion towards Mila, because we really haven't talked about her at all.
Because she doesn't do anything. Because she's not important.
This is where my big theory comes in, and it might steer the conversation. I don't know.
Go for it.
This is my first time reading this after reading 40 years of Legion, of putting things into my own headcanon, right? One of the games I love to play is, there are big truths or there are big things in comics, big moments in comics that people always talk about, like, wow, when Giant Size X-Men landed, boom, when, I don't know, Bullseye killed Elektra, boom, when moments, right? Moments, issues, big issues, right? That people may know. Oh, the death of Phoenix, or the
Superman.
crisis, right? Every death of Superman, right? And there are a lot of people that can talk about those things. And then you go, great, but how many of you have actually read them? And not as many hands go up. And then you go read it and you're like, oh, wait, this is interesting. I'm seeing this in a whole new way, even though I knew this, right? But until you read it, okay. So I'm sort of playing that game, but I'm also going to be putting on, I'm not necessarily trying to rewrite it like Jay would, but I think there's part of that. So I'm putting all these elements together. And I'm thinking about DC horror might be selling at this time, but it is a kid's book. So there's only so much you can really delve into some darker aspects. And forgive me if this is a trigger warning. If if I say it and you want me to re-say it or whatever, we'll talk about it. Did Invisible Kid die or did he commit suicide?
That's an interesting question.
Now, we know the answer to that. Look, Eric's already, he's like, what?
Yeah.
Okay. I just have to put the pieces together that are here and kind of go in some way. Okay. Here's my reasoning. The Invisible Kid disappears. Then he shows back up. And then Brainy does his little mental whammy jammy thing with his technology and they discover Milo. But something so monumental in his memory forces the machine to explode. So they never know what it is. But Brainy starts talking about, what's the terminology he uses? Hysterical amnesia, not uncommon in cases of traumatic shock. Something that he learned is so traumatic that it created this thing. Then he goes and talks to Phantom Girl, who, by the way, is my favorite Legionnaire. And he's like, you're the only one who can understand this. I'm in this world. Here I am, blah, da, 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 da. And she's like, God, that's so amazing. Our powers are so alike. And it's all, she finds out it's all because of love, right? He goes, I'm going to tell her how much I love her. Let's see. You two are literally worlds apart. Not for long, Phantom Girl. I have everything worked out. You turn the page and he says, Mon-El's penalty forbids me from becoming invisible for a week, but after that, I'm visiting her realm to persuade her to come into our world as my wife. And that really great Mike Grell panel of Lyle Norg, that's just such a beautiful shot of him. He knows she's a ghost. How is he going to bring her to this world? Is this he's trying to almost rationalize this thing? So it's not that she's coming to his world. I feel like he's going to her world. And the way that's going to happen is he's not going to stop Validus. He's not going to disappear. He's going to save the day, but I know what's happening next. And that's why he doesn't do anything and allows himself to die. This whole issue is not the death of Invisible Kid. It's the suicide of Invisible Kid. Bye. Did I just rewrite 50 years of Legion continuity?
So just so everybody knows, as Peter is telling this, Eric is sitting here playing with his fingers, almost like in a Mr. Burns kind of way, just waiting to respond to this.
Yeah.
So
I also, well, one more thing though, I also do not want to, I'm not making fun of the situation. I'm not trying to, we are talking about comic books and part of this I'm just throwing out because there are, for my reasoning. So I do want to throw that out.
Eric, take it away.
Yes. So I love it when Peter throws out these theories of his, and that I'd never considered that, Peter, the suicide angle of it. And I think it's a very intriguing read of the situation. And of course, they're not going to, in 1974, they're not going to play with that at all.
Yeah.
Now I want to see that story now to see how it would play out. But anyway, it is, I'm trying to think. So he does say after he comes to that he doesn't remember anything and doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't say, does he, that he knows anything. He just says, I don't want to talk about it. Right, because he collapses. They see Mila through the Magna whatever memory thing. And then, I'm fine now, he says. I'll go to my quarters. Oh, we Mentos scanned your brain, which, privacy violation. But he does say, then you know about Mila. Okay, I don't want to talk about it. Let's drop the subject. But then he talks to Phantom Girl. So the entire time I was reading this, I was thinking that he simply did not remember the truth about Mila. And because he does say, Peter, that that he's going to bring her to his world and convince her to become his wife. But maybe subconsciously, he does realize this and therefore giving credence to your theory.
Yeah. So this is something that I hadn't thought about, obviously. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of discussion that you get if you listen to the Legion Project podcast, all these cool theories so it's fun to be actually part of this discussion right now. But one of the things that's really interesting that I went back to once Peter called that out is that we know that in the conversation with Phantom Girl that Lyle says that he's basically grounded for a week from using his power. Then part 2 begins. We're assuming that it's going to be a week later because the second panel is Lyle getting the okay to use his powers again. But then what does he not do when he goes to get that electronic brain? He stays visible, right as is bursting through. He could have gone invisible, right?
Can I contradict you? I think he is invisible here. And talking about page 20.
Let me see. Let me take a look.
At least on my copy, Invisible Kid looks like he's slightly erased from the panels.
Yeah, maybe he is. Yeah, okay. I'll buy that.
And, they did this a lot with him in the Silver Age where they would just do dashed lines, his outline.
Yeah.
To indicate that. But in this one, I really do think he is invisible.
Yeah,
although
he says he's unseen.
It is debatable.
No, actually, it's very specific.
Well, yeah.
He's vigilant but unseen, so he is invisible at this point. So, okay.
And it says, hopefully, if my invisibility shield can keep this brain from sensing I'm here.
Yeah.
But then it says
I don't know what the invisibility shield is, but
that's like his. Because I was reading up on it, like that's why his clothing can be invisible because it extends out. So yeah.
So I'm going to take a different track on this.
Please.
It's kind of funny as you were talking about, like, is it okay if I say Lyle unaliving himself? I know online that seems to be the nice way of saying suicide. And I'm just like, just say suicide. But anyways, so this, does anybody here know the My Neighbor Totoro theory?
I know.
Or do you know the movie My Neighbor Totoro? Am I going down a complete rabbit hole?
I do not.
Okay. So My Neighbor Totoro is this animated movie out of Japan. It's one of the most beautiful kids movies ever made. Like if you've got kids, you've probably watched it or they've watched it or whatever. And it's this really beautiful tale that I think I'm going to get his name wrong because I get everybody's name wrong. Miyazaki was the guy who directed it. And he's one of the greatest animated directors of all time. And he wanted to tell a story about his childhood. And like when he would go to visit his family and they were on this rice farm. And it's the story of these two girls who end up hanging around with this big kind of almost fantasy bear. And everybody who watches it wants to put like more depth and more darkness into what is this essentially really cute, nice, not deep story. It's a beautiful movie, but like it's just about these two kids kind of growing up. So they're all like, the kids are dead. That's the theory of the movie. And if you watch the movie and you go like, these kids are dead, you can actually put a whole new plot into this film instead of just this kind of, like this magical journey for these kids. And it kind of feels the same way of just, and I don't mean this as an insult, but it's like we want to add more depth to this story just as readers and especially as adults. And the same thing happened with My Neighbor Totoro. All these adults are watching this going, there has to be more to this. And at the end of the day, I don't think it is. Like, I think when he says she's going to join me in the real world, he's not thinking I'm going to join her. He's thinking I'm going to figure out a way to do this. And I think I don't think it would ever occur to Lyle Norg to commit suicide. And I think just as adult readers, we kind of want something else. We want something more. We want to go a little bit darker on this. And yeah, it's 1974. They never would have done it, but I don't see Lyle as that character either, if that makes any sense.
It reminds me of the theory of the Grease movie being just a death vision of Sandy's at the beginning.
Or like everything's a Jacob's Ladder scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's Jacob's Ladder. They're remembering this as they're about to die. Yeah, like at the end of Grease, they're flying off to heaven, right?
Yeah.
If this story was revisited during the 5 years later era, that's what they would have come up with.
Absolutely.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where there's so much missing from this story. And we've said this now multiple times during this podcast, right? That you have to fill in the blanks because otherwise it makes no sense. Sorry, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, now, there's one thing I wanted to kind of turn the conversation to, and I don't know if this is something that y'all had called out as well, but it seemed an odd choice even to have this issue be about the subject of him dying because it seemed to me that they introduced a new power for Invisible Kid, this being this dimensional shifting capability, right? I mean, as far as we knew, his invisibility was just like, okay, you're the Invisible Man, you just turn invisible, and that's it. That's the extent of your power. But here we're given this thing where he can shift into this weird other dimension and kind of see an alternate reality similar to the similar powers that Phantom Girl is given over time, right? Where she can kind of shift through these different dimensions, going whether she's going to Big Still or whether she's, doing other things to rescue Joe, all this other stuff, right? So I thought it was a weird choice to give him this power. And then, of course, we get to see this a little bit later in future iterations of the Legion in some ways.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, because I didn't realize then when I was reading those stories about Invisible Kid 2, where Levitz picks up on this exact point or detail about Lyle's powers and throws them at Jacques. They end up reversing that. But then when I read this, I'm like, oh, this is maybe why they touch on this. And it is such a crime in a sense that that Bates and company did not add that, issues ago, so that we got to see this develop over time, and you actually feel something for it, instead of it being introduced quickly and it ends.
Well, that's the reality of Bronze Age, Silver Age, right? Like something comes in and then it's gone, and there's, I think that's always been the funniest part about what Legion history they keep and what Legion history they don't, and what's important. I mean, like, there's an issue where they say that everybody lives for like 1,000 years and they're all actually in their 50s. They just look like teenagers because of this. And then they're like, nope, that's thrown off. We're not going to worry about that. I'll say this. We've talked about this issue for about an hour. I guarantee you the four of us have now talked more about this issue than Carrie Bates, Mike Grell, or Murray Boltonoff did when this issue was published. So there was no thought of like, hey, how do we build this up? Or how do we make this? That's not what DC Comics were at the time, right? They were very much, you don't expect anyone to read more than one.
So one of the issues that Eric and I covered recently in our format, we look at a particular Legion issue and then we look to see if they have other appearances around the DC universe at that time in 1986, 87, whatever. And one of the issues that we looked at, Eric, is Superman 415 during the crisis. On the cover, revealed at last Supergirl's secret marriage. And it's this whole thing where, Supergirl has died in the crisis, and then this alien comes to Superman and says, oh, I'm Supergirl's husband. And he's like, what? And then they go figure it out. And she had amnesia and then married this guy and then whatever, blah, blah, blah. Who was that writer? Carrie Bates.
If you want a reason why Superman got rebooted and they let John Byrne rip everything apart, that's one of those stories that can point to it. Yeah. So
it's just those little things that come out, Mila, this dimension thing, whatever else, and that never get picked up again. And then maybe some writer down the way does pick it up. And I'm thinking of like the whole double brain thing in Mon-El's brain, the other person,
Ultrogand.
Yeah, right. Like it's only when you look at it retroactively and then you're like, oh, we can really do some little, remember that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely has, this issue has that feeling of like, are we ever really going to get to Mila and this dream dimension again? Now, we have the hindsight of 50 years, but at the time.
Yeah. And they do go back. I know, Jim, you wanted to take us down that path and then we keep wandering off of it because there's so many routes to go. So let me ask you this. So we're talking about now like Legion Volume 2, 299, and then when they get into Tales of the Legion, 316, 317, when, for those of you who haven't read it, and the Tales I would understand if you haven't read, because as far as I know, you can't find them anywhere. Like I had to go back and pull out floppies to kind of recap this, to remember. So, yeah, so we have this, I don't want to say throwaway issue, but we have this issue where basically like, hey, here's a new power for Invisible Kid. And then Levitz is able to build like essentially a long running, more than a year storyline of Jacques suddenly having this power and going to this alternate universe and running into a demon who's pretending to be the original Invisible Kid. Mm-hmm. So here's question number one. So does that mean Milo was the demon?
Well, that's a good one. I like that one.
Right? Because like she's granting
Yeah.
Like it's revealed in Tales. The demon reveals at the end that he lets people see their greatest dreams or their greatest nightmares or like what they want the most. And so we have Invisible Kid saying, "I'm the only one who's never had a long-term girlfriend." And so all he wants is a girlfriend. And then he somehow ends up in this zone where that's what he gets. He gets this fantasy. And so is Mila the demon?
So it turns into an actual Jacob's Ladder scenario, right? If you've seen the movie, right? It's a similar thing with the temptation and whatnot. That's a fascinating angle too.
Yeah, I thought that story, in issue 299, when we first see what I'll just call the ghost of Lyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Invisible Kid too, and he fight because he wants them to stay with him instead of saying, "Hey, I want to go back with you," whatever. But then he realizes, I'm looking at 299. This is page 16. "You're not leaving. I'll kill you if I have." And then Lyle stops and says, "What in God's name am I saying? I'm really sorry, Mister. If you really exist and aren't only another torture of my mind's invented." Torture of my mind's invented to punish me. And he just walks away and they get out of that dimension. But then, yes, Jay, when they come back in the Tales story, then we get the dream demon and all this stuff. Look, again, that none of this works. I think Paul just picked up on what happens here in 203 and decides to write this story, or tease us with the returns, so to speak, of Lyle. And then almost a year later, right, he's like, "Well, I don't really want to bring him back or anything. So I'm going to write this other story," and totally negating that wonderful moment that we see of Lyle there, which would have been a great coda, maybe in issue 205 or 20, or was it 206 where they brought Lyle and Feral Lad back as
with
clones?
Yeah, right.
Oh, I hate it. I hated that story.
Well, especially considering what it ended up resulting in.
Exactly.
Like it's I mean, it's a tough one because I agree with you completely, Eric. Like you have 299, which is this really nice kind of wrap up, and you can sort of say like, okay, yeah, Lyle ended up in this other dimension and it was a mistake and it shouldn't have happened. And then you kind of hope like, okay, if like, is the resolution that he gets to go, I mean, like, to heaven, or is that like, could you have that resolution where you show like, okay, Lyle finally gets peace or finally gets happiness? And also Jacques, like the whole point of this plot is to get Jacques comfortable with being Invisible Kid. Like it was a really good subplot of like, I've taken on a dead person's name and I've taken on their powers and I really don't deserve any of this. And it was a real nice way to build his character, which I think is why a lot of Bronze Age and especially Levitz fans really like Jacques as a character because they got to see this growth. The problem is that like Levitz kind of ruined Invisible Kid 1's happy ending.
Yeah.
And then with the Tales stories, like it's revealed that it was never really Invisible Kid and it was actually this demon that's pretending all this stuff. And then you sort of do the math and you go, okay, so is this the same dimension because it's the same powers? And if it's the same dimension, then does that mean Lyle got tricked? What's happening here, right?
Or could both be true, right? I mean, on page 17 of 299, there's, when the last panel we see of Lyle, it's almost done where he's ascending into something, right? Heaven, who knows? But yeah, sure. But we don't know. And so when we see this dream demon in that Tale story, they could be completely separate entities. We don't know. They're just using the Lyle piece of it as just the MacGuffin to say, oh, look, he's back, but he's not who you think he is.
I would prefer to go with the let's just have it different because I think it's such a dumb death. And then you kind of want this character to have that happy ending because you just go with this is more of a torture of Jacques, and then a torture of Wildfire as well.
That's actually one of the things that I have on under what works. Just because it's a low key death, right? He's not saving the universe. Unlike other superhero stories that where characters have died, but he is saving his teammates. I found that refreshing that even though this character died, he did it for a greater cause, whether it was subconscious or not. I still really like Peter's theory on this. I just really like the idea that he would, because what earlier in the issue when Brainy and Monel are talking about him, they talk about Invisible Kid's always been a first-rate Legionnaire, even though it's something now to worry about because of this hysterical amnesia thing. And Invisible Kid has been around for, forever. He's shown, even though, they retcon it into him coming later, you see him or something or some character that looks like him, very much like him in the background in some of the earliest stories. But so anyway, he's been a long-term Legionnaire, but he goes invisible. What do you do with that? Well, he's Carrie Bates. He doesn't know what to do with the guy. Let's just kill him off, right? So it's probably that decision was probably that quick in Carrie Bates's mind. But I like I said, I really like how even though, wait, it just occurred to me. So if he does this as he's being crushed by Validus, and by the way, I just want to mention in case we don't get to this, but on page 20, you see Lyle grabbing that brain and crushing it in his hand, and you see that crack. The sound effect crack, and in my notes I'm like, that's not the brain that you're hearing that from.
That's
Lyle.
mine.
Yeah.
My thought on that was when was Invisible Kid strong enough to shatter?
Yeah, I know.
Or what part? But anyway, yeah. And look, it's an iconic thing, right? It's an iconic moment. And I agree with you, Eric. I think it's a really good point of it. We kind of want all of our deaths to be these big, grand moments, and it's this nice little bit. But I would say, like, they did it better with Chemical King on the saving the team, and they did it. Even though I thought the Magnetic Kid death was dumb, they did it better with him as well. And I just think I don't think they did a great job showing like how much of a threat it was. Like, it would have been cool if in that room there had been like a dozen injured Legionnaires. Like, if everything was tight together and you realize, like, if I don't do this, bad stuff's going to happen. And instead everything's sort of so scattershot. Yeah, I really enjoy like when the stakes aren't as high and the character's sacrificing to protect friends, and like that's a great point. I really agree with that.
If they had just added little bit of dialogue, I won't be able to join or see Mila again, but I have to save my friends. Just increase the melodrama of the moment. Because he is effectively, at least as far as what we see on the page, he doesn't know that he can join her after he dies. I don't see that written out here. So yeah, that makes, if you take that into account, I think his death is even more memorable, that he chooses to do this, even though it denies him his love and obviously his life.
So let me a question for the folks here around the reason of Carrie Bates killing off Invisible Kid. It's 1974. Bronze Age is in full swing. Invisible Kid is his power set isn't all that fun for an action comic book. Do you all think that this was done just because they needed to, they're going to be focusing on, these big world busting powers and big fights and stuff like that? Is this just a reason to get him off the board so they don't have to worry about saying, oh, by the way, here's Invisible Kid every 5 issues?
Well, I just want to just throw in here. There's a person that listens to the Legion Project, and he makes the joke of that Invisible Kid is always around, even though you don't see him.
His action figure is just an empty box, right?
But to your point, Jim, I'm like, when you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, but what about Phantom Girl then?
Yeah, so I was actually really prepared to go in with this is Carrie Bates cleaning house, and this is Carrie Bates not wanting to write the lower tier characters. I thought that's the perfect theory behind this, because the big question of this issue, which we can is like, why do this? And I was like, okay, can I find any evidence of this? Like, can I find any reason? Is there any interviews with Carrie Bates saying this is why I did this? And I can't find anything. I pulled out this old issue. I don't know if everybody has a copy of, like, it's the best of Legion Outpost. It's a collection of the Legion Outpost, like sort of the best articles. And one of them that came out that they printed in like early 1973 in like Legion Outpost 3, they asked the fans, like, which Legionnaire would you want gone? And so Bouncing Boy wins or loses. Right. Supergirl, Matter Eater Lad, Dream Girl, Duo Damsel, Light Lass, and then Mon-El. And so you sort of make the case. So I think they didn't want Mon-El because he was too much like Superboy. It's just like having another Superboy. And for a lot of those, you go, well, those are the weakest characters. And those are the characters that we can't do anything with. So you go, okay, so then Bates knows about this, and he knows that the Legion is changing. We get Wildfire. Power level goes up. Timberwolf gets changed. But then, like you say, like, why keep Phantom Girl? Why keep Dream Girl? Why, after they wrote out Bouncing Boy and Duodamsel when they got married, he would bring them back like once a year. So he was still rotating through all of these characters. So as much as I'd love to make the argument that he's just cleaning out the weak characters, he's not. Like, everybody's still coming back. So I don't know. I end up so why kill this guy? And I don't know if I have a good answer for this anymore. Like, aside from just shock value, or it's kind of like how, like, Paul Levitt said, I never want to write Tyrock, not because of the problems with the character, but because I don't know how to write a guy with sonic powers. And you've seen they've had problems with Black Canary on the same level with that. Like, some writers just ignore them and some writers bring them back. And I wonder if it was just Bates going, I don't know how to write Invisible, or Invisible isn't dramatic enough on the page. Like, every time you use him, it's basically like the dotted lines to show his, and then the colorist has to kind of fade him out a little bit. Maybe that was enough. Like, maybe they just said, or maybe it's the costume was horrible. Nobody wanted, but I mean, they were redoing everybody's costumes at the time anyway. I don't know. Anybody have an idea of why Invisible Kid, Peter?
In a weird way, though, and this issue is definitely, what's the word? Guilty of this. If you have a character you don't like, then just don't write it, right? Like, what's so interesting about this, we know at this time there are a heck of a lot of Legionnaires, but we only really focus on a handful, right? Saturn Girl is in one panel, right? And all she really is there to confirm the thing about Tharok, right? Like, and I was like, really, that's what you're doing, Carrie Bates? You're just throwing it like just once? And even Karate Kid, who we see in the beginning and we see at the end, there's a shot of like Sun Boy and Phantom Girl and Brainiac 5. They're like, oh my God, this thing is coming to our headquarters, and they're in, I'm assuming, the mission monitor room or whatever. But it's not until the next time we see them. Oh, by the way, so Karate Kid is there too. So it's this weird, like, okay, we're just going to drop characters in and out. So you feel like, well, just do that for any character you don't like, or then ship them off to back somewhere else, or I don't know if the Academy was around at this time, go make them a teacher at the Academy or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's like, you don't necessarily have to kill them, but I have this weird theory. It's not as strange as the one I said earlier, but, or maybe it is. When you said that a lot of the Legion deaths, they're big, these big moments. Now, again, my love of the Legion is later. It's not, it's pre, the pre-80s stuff is lore to me, but it's not like, I don't need to love it because I haven't read it, right? But I find like most of the deaths are kind of not silly, but just like Faralad's death. Did he have to die? Did
Right.
Invisible Kid have to die? Why did Karate Kid do what he did? It didn't end the story, like, why did he have to do what he did? So,
okay. So the Karate Kid one, I will say, like, Nemesis Kid had beaten him to death. So he was going to be dead even if he hadn't flown and destroyed and he destroyed those things to save the planet. But it's kind of a little hard. Like, it's not super clear, but yeah. So that was one. Yeah. I mean, Faralad's so written in history of like, he had to do this. But yeah, when you start thinking about it, you're like, really? Did he have
I think they just want the gold statues of themselves. Like, they just,
yeah.
I want a gold statue in Shanghai or wherever, or in the room,
I think the best way to put it is, so on Digging for Kryptonite a few weeks ago, there was an interview with Sterling Gates, and he had a great quote, and he said, it hurts when people in charge don't like a character because then they don't want that character to exist, which is, that's honestly, it's a problem, I think, in comics, generally speaking. But the good news is it's comics. So, you can always reverse anything you want.
It's Giffen every time he kills Karate Kid,
exactly.
But then he's also the first one to admit that, well, you want Blue Beetle back? Then all I have to write is Blue Beetle walks into the room.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, he kills Karate Kid, and then DC Comics says, do you know how much money we make from Karate Kid's name because of the movies? So bring him back now. And because he is literally the most profitable Legionnaire for DC. Because every single time there's a Karate Kid movie, they write a check to DC Comics. And DC's like, get him back. We don't care if it makes no sense. Get him back. So there's that. Yeah, a good point, Peter. I agree that a lot of these deaths, you kind of go like, Chemical King dies solely because of an adult Legionnaire story that Jim Shooter wrote in a day. And, and also, again, because I don't think the writers knew what to do with them because none of them understood science. So it's, hey, what do chemical reactions do? So but then having said that, I can make that case about almost every superhero death. Like, Like trying to think of, I mean, the problem is the ones where they did have to die and the ones that really have effect, they keep bringing them back. Barry Allen. Can we just, let's go Barry Allen and just stick with that?
Was there also this, I know this happens later, the Mike Grell era of Legion, did they ramp up? This is like stuff that it feels like I know this, but because I haven't read it, I don't know if it's true. That they ramped up more of obviously the sex and the sex appeal, I should say.
Yeah.
But was there also like more romance? Did they I'm trying to think, like, does Carrie Bates in his weird, I don't know how old he was, mid-age writing or whatever.
He's in his 20s.
Oh, so he's young. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's like this fanciful thing. Did he think this was a romantic story? Like, is that why he wanted to kill? Because he wanted the tragedy of Invisible Kid and this because of, I'm trying to make sense of like that question of why did he kill him?
Okay, I'm going to give you, this is a sarcastic response. I think this is the idea of romance for a guy in his 20s who has only ever read comics.
And that's my point. That's my point.
I'm just gonna leave it there.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think yes. Like I think because like the Silver Age is very much like the female character sees the male character and says, "I like you. You're going to be my boyfriend," and the guy goes, "Coolio, that's all great." Whereas here we're getting a little bit more, but it's also some really badly written stuff.
So, Eric, to your point about why they didn't kill off Phantom Girl is because of the sexiness vibe, right? She's a female, good-looking character, right? So they're not going to get rid of her, of course. I just think it's interesting when we talk about the romance aspect of it, because this is, and I think specifically that frame of where Lyle and Tinya are talking about, you're the only person I can confide in. This is a springboard to a lot of further retconning in the future of Lyle Norg being gay. Right. And so then we get, Jay, you mentioned Chemical King earlier. The fans, especially folks in like Legion Outpost and a lot of these other mailing lists, they put those two together. And then eventually it never actually, I don't know if it ever actually becomes officially canon, but there's enough stories that are written about the two of them where folks kind of make that leap.
So it's never in a comic book, but there's a book written about the Legion where it becomes like these two were a couple. But I kind of view that the same way I view those Mayfair Games texts, like and I'm like, okay, this is really cool. But if it's not in a comic book, like, no, like, I'm sorry. Like if we have enough craziness in comic books to deal with, we don't need other source material to give us our canon.
Well, you noted that Secret Origins issue and
yes.
by the way, all these issues are on the DC app. And even though I have like all the tales in my collection, and I did read the physical one of 203, all the other stuff I read on the app, including that Secret Origins issue. And I was like, oh, I mean, my God, if they didn't outwardly say it, but they outwardly said it, like inwardly said it or whatever.
Right.
I was like, wow, I've never read that issue before. And I was like, okay, that's in my mind. That would have cemented a lot of things, and it would have echoed the whole Shrinking Violet, Light Lass relationship too, which actually was a little bit more on the page than obviously this was.
Yeah.
But that issue really sort of cemented some things. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think, in my reading sequence, I had read an article. I was just doing research about the Lyle Norg character. I saw a quote from Mark Waid where he said, the intent of that story was not to actually to pair the two of them romantically, at least outwardly, right? But yeah, then after that, reading that quote, then I read the story. And I'm like, really? Are you sure about that, Mark?
I think it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings, right? Where it's like, like when, like Sam, you're like, all right, Sam, I'm pretty sure you're in love with Frodo, but we're not saying anything. And I think it's just how that heightened emotion of how they've written it, right? And it just kind of goes a little.
Plus, we have to think of the it's 19. Well, the book is cover dated 90, so it probably was 89. But even Paul Levitz during the Baxter run, where a letter writer was like, oh, hey, this whole Shrinking Violet, Light Lass thing. Paul Levitz one time even said, well, I mean, that certainly is not our intention, but if that's, and I'm like, Paul, come on. You know what you're doing, so at some level of whether they're playing coy for a corporate reason or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Plausible deniability, Peter.
That's right.
It's like there's that scene in where Siobhan basically confronts Jan about a romantic relationship, and Jan's totally shocked, and you can read it two different ways, right? It's either the Jan's never had a girl throw herself at him, and he doesn't know how to react as a heterosexual man, or Jan's in the closet and he doesn't know how to react. And so that story, you can read it however you want. And if the reader wants to take it one way or the other way, whatever makes the story better for you as the reader, right? So I guess in your case, Peter, if suicide makes the story better for you, then we'll we'll go with that. Because again, it gives, like, again, to pull back to the My Neighbor Totoro, and I enjoy the movie better thinking the two kids are dead, which I know makes me a horrible human being. But the movie is just more entertaining at that point because there's just more depth to it. So we're just gonna full circle everything in this podcast. That's how it works.
Well, speaking of full circle, though, now, when you retcon in this whole dream dimension thing, I do like the fact that Mila is the dream demon, and it's not necessarily again, he's not unaliving himself. It's like that he was such tempted to make maybe all this stuff happen, on some level. Maybe this whole situation is because of this thing, and then you throw in the weird, like, Carrie Bates trying to make it a romance story. So it's actually romance in the way that I like it, where it's tragic. Like, I like romance things that are messy and ugly and reveal the truth about humans. Don't give me Notebook. I want Blue Valentine, if you know that movie. Like, I want heart-wrenching, like, okay, so now that kind of makes sense. And so I kind of like that little bit of connection. But then again, as you mentioned, then there's also, I read the 0 Hour stuff. Did they touch on any of his sexuality in that, or no?
You mean the anniversary special from a couple years back? Is that what you're talking about?
I haven't read that. I meant the Archie Legion, like the whole Archie Legion. Because he was he was actually a very likable, prominent character.
The interesting thing about that, and then Jay, when you mentioned about the that encyclopedia or whatever it was for DC, I think that reference was actually for the reboot Lyle Norg. Are you sure about that?
That was the craziest thing when I read that. They were like, "Nope, OG Legion," and I was like, "Huh?" And and
the reason I bring it up is because even though it wasn't explicit, it was never explicitly said, right, Peter? The same thing, right? It's DC's never going to commit to something like that, especially with teenage characters. But there are a couple scenes where Lyle receives a note from a mysterious person with the first letter of C that they're excited to see each other. And then, and that's later on in various, I think it was the AOL chats that they had at the time. Jeff Moy basically said, yeah, this is Kondo Arlick, meaning Chemical King, or the reboot Kondo, which is just a TV reporter. And yes, they were going to make Lyle gay. Were the two things that they confirmed.
I read those at the time, but I've only ever read them once, and I know there are several fans of that era, so I will say no.
So I was going to say, Peter, so first of all, as you're now admitting to everybody on the podcast that you like messy romance, I'll put my therapist hat on. And then the second one, it's funny, like, as soon as you said that, and again, because I always rewrite these stories, all I can think is how much more interesting this whole issue 203 would have been if Mila looked like Phantom Girl. Like, if they had just given her, like, the same hairstyle, and then it's Phantom Girl injured at the end, and that's why Lyle sacrifices himself. And I'm like, that's more interesting, and that's messy as hell. And then Tinya's like, he died for me.
Yeah.
Joe, would you ever do that?
Yeah.
And, like, you could, right? Sorry, that's where my brain immediately went, like, how could we make this messier? And it's like, oh, this is messy.
If he just would have said, Mila, I'm coming, or some acknowledgement, then again, it adds the layer of tragedy. Instead of the Legionnaires explaining it to us, instead of Carrie Bates explaining it to us through the Legionnaires, we could have actually had it in a story.
But again, it's that great, you're writing for 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
So he's got to just spoon feed, right? That's the thing. Eric, we haven't heard from you, and I wanted to get your take. Why do you think they killed Invisible Kid? I'm going to go back to the question I asked before. I want answers.
I think you said it earlier. It's totally, I don't know what to do with this, or I don't like it, or the artists don't want to use him because he's invisible, even though they do, different artists do show him differently. So they could. I tend to think it's just like, well, it's easier to get rid of somebody that I'm not fond of, or it's just easier if he's not around, even though I agree with Peter, just don't write about him, just leave him alone. But yeah, I totally think it was easier.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's right, which is sad. I think that's the biggest thing as an adult when you learn about the comic industry and you just go like, oh, wow, these decisions were made for the silliest of reasons or but then I think like as a Legion fan myself, if I had been handed the Legion when I was 25 and they said, you have to write, and I've made this statement before, so I'm just going to piss off his fans again. I probably would have killed Matter Eater Lad within the first 5 issues because I just can't stand the character. I have now grown to appreciate why people like him as I've talked online, but like as a kid as a guy in the 20s reading, especially 5 years later, like I hated every single time he appeared in 5 years later, and I would have been like, hey, you're getting a gun to the head. I'm just getting this over with, and you're never coming back. I will have the body. I will make sure it is obvious that this guy's not getting resurrected because I never want to see this again. As a much older person, I wouldn't do that anymore. I would be much nicer about it. So cue the angry emails, Jim, that we're going to get from this. From everybody.
That's Jay that said that.
Yes, that's me.
Jay.
That's not Jim. That's Jay. So blame me.
So I think, would we say that we've kind of squeezed all the juice we can out of Superboy and the Legion 203 at this point?
I don't know, Eric and Peter, this is a short episode for you. I'm sure you could, sure there's like 20 more things.
I have a few quick things.
Sure, go for it.
That don't need answers. They're just, again, observations of someone who read this for the first time. Why is Mon-El so angry in this issue? They do a lot of footnoting of the Legionnaires' real names, and it made me wonder when they actually did we know it was Lyle already? I kind of like those things. And that's one of those things, like if I ever do a Legion read from the beginning, that'll reveal itself. But that was always an interesting thing. And then the question of, where are Validus's eyes, which was so funny. But then in the next panel, Validus does, he has his arm in front of his little brain casing.
Yeah.
So you could kind of imply, and I know some artists draw it as like little slits on the side, almost like whales, one on each side. So I thought that was a fun little moment for that.
So speaking of that, Peter, that was one of my questions. I was really curious. One, because you said earlier that you're a Validus stan, but I was wondering from the three of you, knows Validus or no-knows Validus?
Knows.
Really?
Yeah. Well, and so I'm looking at page 17 where he busts through the wall, and get to Peter's point, right? That you can see kind of these little eye slits, right, in his brain case, whatever you're calling it, and then the little nose. So it does give him more of that approach of having an actual face, right?
Yeah, I'm with Peter. It's like no nose, this because it makes him look more alien, more.
Yeah, I could see that
menacing.
Too,
yeah. So
totally.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead, Peter.
Nope, that was it.
I hate to say this, I am ambivalent towards the nose or no nose. I'm just, as long as I see a big purple monster, I'm happy. And I'm like,
there you go.
It's like, I don't care. It's like, give me the lightning. Here's mine. Don't let him talk. The moment he talks, that's what I'm like, nope. I just want grunts. I want Tharok to be in charge, but I don't care if it's that.
Because in retroactive continuity, he's just a big baby.
That's right.
Yeah. Which is also one of those great questions. How do you handle the fact that your kid murdered your former teammate?
Yeah,
I know.
We got to watch out. Jay's going to start getting us spun up for a rant here if we're not careful.
No. I'm good. So I wanted to just address a couple things. And I know, Peter, you said you didn't need any answers, but I think they were throwing real name text boxes, like even back into Silver Age. I remember seeing them, but I know in Bronze Age, they definitely really start because they're trying to get as many new fans as they can. And they figure that's a way to do it. The coolest part about Bronze Age text boxes is when they throw in 30th century slang and then they show the explanation at the bottom, which when you get into those issues, it's a real, like, cool up, everybody. Those are my favorite little bits of like them trying, because they're just like, we're appealing to teenagers. Like you can see that shift. That's cool.
Do you think they're ever trying to get those to catch on or something, to have all the teenagers start saying cool up in real life?
I say Greif.
Yeah.
Well, Greif is a good one. I like
Greif is a good one.
I do that too.
Sprocking was another one that they used to say.
Love sprocking, actually. Yeah, that's great.
I have a couple things in here too. Speaking of Mila and all that stuff, just the whole idea of Invisible Kid having this new power or new ability that is tied to his power, and this other realm where she says she's a ghost and she's trapped there. She died and her spirit is in this place and she feels like she's trapped. Is this not the underworld? What's limbo?
Purgatory?
Purgatory, yes.
Yeah.
so much they could play with there if they had decided to go on with that. I love it when, especially in Legion, when the writers and the artists start exploring the characters and their abilities, and they introduce these new elements that just are really appealing. And then the second thing I wanted to just throw out there, I like this. I like this. This just sounds so terrible. I like this death because it opens the door for legacy in the Legion down the road. That's something that we talk about a lot in DC Comics. After the New 52, that was one of the things that they took away. Sort of. It was just all messy. There's no real legacy the way that they had developed it over the previous 40 years or whatever. And so we get that, and we get some nice, sometimes not so nice stories with Jacques, dealing with the fact that he's a legacy character or a legacy member of the Legion. So I really like that aspect of that. It's a secondary thing that comes out of Lyle's death. But and then the final thing, we just really kind of touched on Mike Grell's art here, but there's a couple panels in here where Lyle is explaining to Phantom Girl how he is able to perceive this other dimension. This is on page 11. And
Thank you.
I loved the way that Grell approached this in a very simple, for kids, right? And adults like me, to grasp by changing the focus, and they lighten, the background, or they lighten the foreground. It just so well done.
Yeah.
In that way. And I will say, I looked at this issue on the DC app, or no, is it the DC app or the latest DC Finest, the Zap Goes the Legion volume?
Right. Yeah.
This issue's in that, and it is not as well defined with that new coloring or whatever they did to adjust it. So Grell, I think of Grell at this point. So he's like the Dan Mora of his time. Because he just goes on to, he created such excitement for the Legion, and he went on to do a Warlord and has there some
John
other
Sable.
Yes, John Sable later, things like that. It's just like he was like the hot new property, and he's redesigning costumes and all. So it's just like immediately I was thinking, oh yeah, he's that day's Dan Mora. And it's like, yes, like, give me more of this.
Yeah. But thank you for calling out those frames, or those two frames, because I thought that was a really cool little comparison, or cool explanation, I guess, with regards to that. And, it's one of those things where, again, I wish that I think, Peter, I think you mentioned this, they should have introduced this many issues earlier, because I would have loved to have seen stories around that, about how they would, how does Lyle focus his attention to be able to get into that realm versus the other one, and what other stories can go from there. Instead, we wait 10 years before we really kind of address it again.
Can I shout out Elizabeth Safian, if we haven't already, who's the colorist for this issue according to Grand Comic Book Database?
Yes.
Thanks for calling out the difference between the original, because I think all four of us have the original, where, the page 11 looks amazing, the way they colored it and the way they did the foreground, background shading. And then I'm looking at like a digital version of the archive, and I think the on the app it's the same thing. And as soon as it got computer colored, it was like the person who didn't understand what this was supposed to be. So it literally is just, his hand is darker, then his hand is lighter, his face is lighter, then his face, and I'm looking at this like, so you just ruined this entire effect. And so it's just sad to say. I'm also glad you called out Mike Grell as well. Like, I mean, I don't think we can stress enough, like, this is his first comic work. He had come from, like, he basically walked into DC Comics. They took a look at it and they said, how'd you like a job? He inks over Cockrum I think it's the issue before, and he drew an Aquaman story. And then Cockrum walks out because they wouldn't give him his pages back. And they're like, how'd you like a job? And what are you going to say? And so then he starts this great Legion run that really defines and elevates the Legion. And he's become, I think he's top 5 Legion artists of all time as far as the effect goes. And he's one of those guys who, and as you're reading the Legion, you can see him grow, you can see him develop, you can see him learning more. So when you see people complain like, oh, his anatomy isn't great, and you're like, it doesn't matter, there's a dynamic aspect to his work that really stands out, and it grabs you as you're reading this. And you're right, Eric, like, it's a guy early in his career who you can just, good stuff's coming. And in hindsight, we of course know good stuff is coming. But like, I think the thing that amazes me the most reading this is like, the writer he became. Like, forget about the art. Like, that Green Arrow run and some of that stuff that like and the John Sayles stuff, like he's writing as well as he's drawing in some cases. And I kind of wonder, like, if DC had said to him, we'll give you 12 issues on the Legion, go nuts, open up the bank, like just say, it's like, we'll pay you for whatever his rates were, and just say, the characters, everybody loves what you've done. If they had done this, I know Jim's going to hate whenever I say, like, instead of the reboot, like if they had said to him, like, go crazy on this, what might have worked. The only point I wanted to make about this, that because we've covered so many different things, but it's funny, like, as we're talking about the threat and this creature coming to destroy the headquarters, and you'd mentioned like the drum beats of this, and all I kept thinking is, this is the Omega story, right? This big creature coming, but the Omega story is done 1,000 times better. And but that's what this story could have been. This monster coming from space, and they can't stop him, and they could have really built it out. And think about in the Omega story, like, you have Matter Eater Lad making this grand sacrifice, and you don't see him for any other time. He just sort of shows up, and he's like, okay, he's the guy that we're writing out. And yet it still works. That's what I was thinking when I was reading this. Like, there's a Legion story that's the same, that's better done. And I would, even with all the craziness that happened and the rewriting and the changing of the art, and Jim Starlin taking his name off and becoming Steve Apollo, the Legion. There's so many funny things like this. Jim, final thoughts.
So for all the, I guess, kvetching we've been doing about this particular issue, like I said at the jump, I kind of, even though there's all kinds of weird things going on here and just weird story problems, I kind of enjoyed reading it. It was, I don't know if you can call it a guilty pleasure, but I like the art. I mean, I think the art really sells it, right? This Grell stuff is fantastic. And the fact that it's his first foray into the Legion makes you want to read more of it and see more of it, and where he takes things from a visual aspect. And then, of course, historically, if you're a fan of the Legion, of knowing all the big story beats that happen throughout the year, of course it's a must read, because you have to understand the death of Invisible Kid and its impact on the rest of the story. But yeah, I mean, it's had a lot of nostalgia. I really loved reading it, and I think it's worth a read if you're a serious Legion fan, for sure.
Yeah, I would recommend, if you're a serious Legion fan and you haven't gone back to, I don't know if I can like really recommend those George Tuska backups that were appearing in Action Comics, I think. But like, when Cockrum takes over, and the whole Cockrum into Grell into Jim Sherman, like, that's just this like amazingly good artistic run. Like, even if the stories aren't kind of working very well, and even if when Vince Colletta starts inking Grell and basically just destroys his pencils, you're still getting kind of half Grell. They still just look great, and there is just a dynamic nature to this. So if you haven't read this and you are really interested in the Legion, this is a great run to get into.
Yeah, well said, both of you. That's exactly how I feel about the impact of this issue, and it was just eye opening. Like I said earlier, looking at Grell's first issue on the Legion and just going, wow, this guy really knows his stuff, and he makes the Legion look cool.
Yeah. It's very much like Star Trek: The Next Generation. There are bad episodes I will never watch again, and there are bad episodes I will absolutely watch again. And I don't necessarily consider this a bad issue. I think for me, if I ever do that straight read through and piece together all the issues I have read and haven't read, then I will really see the hills and valleys, and that will really cement where this issue is, But I love the historical nature of it. I love that it helps connect the Dream Demon stuff, because that I was reading as a kid. That's my era, So I love that. And it's a Validus story. Yay. I love Validus. Even though he's killing people left and right, I do like Validus.
Yeah, I mean, I think even though there's when you reread this just at a basic level from a story perspective, you see all the weird holes and stuff like that. But just as our discussion has kind of been revealing about, well, what if this subtext is part of the story, or maybe this view of it? It shows you that the story was done in enough of a way that you could take it your own way as a reader, which I think is that's a sign of a decently written story. It might not be a great story, but it's a fun story to read because you can make your own imagination do some work.
Yeah, and they did that a lot in this era. Like the number of sly references that they tried to get through in a kid's book or that they got through. So, I mean, Starboy in Dreamgirl's bed, that so you just see the top of his head, or some of the bouncing boy dual damsel jokes that you just go like, whoa, I can't believe they threw that in. So it's yeah, I agree with you, Jim. Like there are those moments where you go, yeah, I can read a little bit into this and maybe I can have a little bit, I can add some depth and get a little bit more enjoyment out of the story. All right. I think we have, I don't want to say beaten this horse into the ground, but I think we've done all we can do on Superboy 203. And to be honest, if at this point we haven't convinced you to read it, I don't know what we could do or what else we could do. So let's do a little quick wrap up and let's start. Since I started with Eric, I'm going to start with Peter this time. Where can everybody find you? How can they follow you? Where are you on the internet?
Yeah, so podcast-wise, Comic Geek Speak, the Daily Rios. The Daily Rios website is a good place because that's where I post like the Legion Project, and if I'm a guest on any other podcast, like this podcast, I'll post on there as well. In terms of my social media, I'm on all the usual ones, and I think most of them are Peter J. Rios or the Daily Rios. I don't quite remember, but Blue Sky and Instagram. And I don't post as much. I tend to, my mouth is usually where all my stuff comes out. So listening to podcasts is the best way.
And how about you, Eric?
Yeah, longboxreview.com is the best place to go for the podcast stuff, including the Legion Project and then my own solo stuff. I do the same thing that Peter does. When this episode comes out, I'll post there about it, but also a bunch of other shows that I've been on. And then, yeah, social media wise, actually, same thing. It's Longbox Review, but I don't tend to post a lot of stuff anymore. I'm just tired of things. But mostly, if you want to interact with me, Blue Sky is probably the best option.
And Jim?
All right. Well, as far as where you can find me online, I have my Legion Reviews website at jimboslegion.blogspot.com. You can find me personally on Blue Sky at jimbofett.bsky.social, on Reddit at jimbofett87, and on Discord as jimbofett in the Legion Fan Club Discord, as well as the Certain Point of View Discord. How about you, Jay?
So I do my weekly column at jmlonglivethelegion.blogspot.com. You can find me on Blue Sky at jmckernan.bsky.social, and you can find me on Reddit and Discord with the username Drake Burrows, which is now I'm noting is very ironic considering I've been ripping apart Carrie Bates, who co-created Wildfire, and yet is my favorite character. So maybe I should just rein all that in next time. And how can everybody find this podcast?
Well, if you want to follow the podcast or get access to the Legion Discord, we are at longlivethelegion.bsky.social, or send us an email and tell us what you think at longlivethelegion2025@gmail.com. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcatcher of choice, or even better, give us 2. You could also find us on pretty much every other social media channel. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we are on YouTube, and so just look for us there and send us a quick hello and tell us what you're liking and what you're not liking and all that good stuff. I think next time we're going to be talking about a movie. So until we get to that episode, we'll sign off the mission monitor board and we will say long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion. Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.